Hey everyone, I'm Alex from Cytonox, and today I'll be ranking the bosses of Hi-Fi Rush from worst to best. Hi-Fi Rush was recently revealed to the public through a spontaneous shadow drop where it was met with almost universal acclaim. I was already planning on covering it eventually, but was pleasantly surprised to find that I had actually been approached with an offer to cover the game using a press-provided review copy. Of course I accepted and was overjoyed to find that it was actually a genuinely awesome game. With the exception of remakes of pre-established good games, new games are often a boring slog to get through for me that I never really enjoy playing nor covering out of obligation. Unlike the legions of formulaic, mass-produced AAA open-world over-the-shoulder games that assault me at every turn, Hi-Fi Rush is a refreshing blast of originality and soul that seldom graces players these days. It's pretty much a new genre, a fusion of character action and rhythm games that comes together quite well. I spent my childhood jumping to the rhythm in the Mario and Luigi RPGs as I walked around and that sort of thing, so this was a concept that really appealed to me. The bosses number only 6, 7 if you count Zanzo and his financial illiteracy. I unfortunately didn't record this because as it's an entire level, it didn't occur to me while I was playing that was the fight, so to speak, despite the health bar being a queue of sorts. That being the case, this list will not explicitly rank him. Do know that I'm very fond of Zanzo and his chronic JoJo posing though, call it Reddit all you want, but I found it hilarious. It might have been groan-worthy if he only did it once, but they committed to the gag so hard that it just looped around to being genuinely funny. I just can't imagine being so miserable that your reaction to seeing this animation is visceral rage. Anyways, as always, thank you to our patrons for supporting the channel and keeping the lights on, so to speak. We very much appreciate your contributions to the arts. There's a wealth of stuff to talk about regarding the 6 bosses who do personally put up a fight, so I won't drag this intro spiel any longer. Let's get into it. Mimosa may be my least favorite boss, but to use that moniker would be deceptive. None of the bosses in this game are bad by any stretch of the word, and I could easily see any ranking of the bosses being defensible depending on one's persuasion. This game has rather complex mechanics if you decide to master it, which I have by no means done. So this is one of those cases where I'm hesitant to make any decisive, massive complaints because it is totally possible some gripes of mine could be chalked up to incompetence of some order. The greatest sin this fight commits is not letting you keep the shark outfit once the battle starts, which remains the hardest fit in Shy's entire repertoire. Mimosa is one of those bosses that you can't damage unless you break their shield, and you know the type, which I generally don't care for. It's fortunately not a very tanky shield, and mainly just a way of pointing you towards calling in Corsica to raise her stun meter. When you do finally bust it though, she gets up in like 2 milliseconds, which is a real blue ball. I'd rather they doubled her shield's health if it meant she stayed down long enough for a satisfying beatdown. She also has this one rather annoying laser orb move where you can't really hit her unless you want to get your head fried off by said laser, so all you can really do is sit there with your dick in your hand, spam calling Peppermint until it's over. I'd also point your attention to that little cube you get stuck in near the end of the battle as an example of a somewhat unclear mechanic. It's a neat callback to the R&D missions, but I was under the impression that all I had to do was remove the shielding on each projector, so I was baffled for a little bit until it came together. Yeah, I know, another dreadful instance of Cytonox low IQ. How is this guy for real? Yada yada. This guy eats bricks for breakfast and lead for lunch. They had established how these work with a low-stakes precedent before, which is good design, but it was so long ago that I just forgot about it because I assumed they'd never come back after the Zanzo levels. If they'd brought them back somehow in the mission prior, it would have definitely made it less confusing to sight read if we're to use music talk. I think the fight could go up in my rankings if I replayed it with my current knowledge of the mechanics, but since this is all about my first impressions of each boss, Mimosa suffers from her occasional obtuseness. Just as with real mimosas, I get the appeal, but they aren't my thing. Rekka is kinda like She-Hulk if she actually did Hulk stuff instead of, I don't know, whatever she did on the show, no comment. She's very adept at bending steel pipes and has a wrestling move so absurd that it reminds me a bit of Henry Cooldown's one-hit kill move from No More Heroes. The fight is significantly more involved than QA1 and for a while I was ready to rank it higher by a long shot. Dodging attacks and whacking during the recovery is the stuff I like, and this began as just that. It began to get on my nerves once the electricity was introduced, however. This stuff does not fuck around. If you step in it, you might as well have detonated a nuclear bomb in your rectum. Chai gets stun-locked for roughly half of his health bar if you're lucky, with zero hope of escape. It's like when you step into the Fool's Idol traps in Demon Souls. You're totally at the game's mercy and just have to take it. I'm sure the obvious response of, okay, well don't run into the obviously hazardous blue lightning in the middle of the room then, is coming to many of your minds. I mean, I could just just dash around everywhere and wait it out, but that's boring and I don't feel like it. Rekka can also hit you when she's tearing pipes out of the wall, which irks me the same way getting hit while opening a door in Dark Souls 2 pisses me off, if that makes any sense. I actually did fight Rekka again playing through the mission after beating the game to hunt for collectibles, and was surprised to find that my opinion didn't really change that much besides how nice it was to be able to parry instead of dodging everything. I commend the amount of phase changes and moveset shakeups to be found here, but wouldn't say they're the most fun additions out there. QA1 Mill is many things: a skilled inspector, a British quote-unquote person, the last guy you'd want performing your colonoscopy, and the first boss. You club his sensitive inspecting hands while he takes his time admiring his missed slam attacks and then get him with the old stop hitting yourself trick. There's not much to it, but that's not terribly important to me for first bosses. He looks cool and is at least able to get a few hits in, which is more than many of his ilk can say. The swipe he does is so fast that it catches me off guard pretty much every time unless I specifically remember it going into the fight. That, and you gotta be careful not to fall off the edge. I've been so conditioned by games to think that you won't be allowed to walk off ledges that whenever a game doesn't have an invisible wall there, it startles the shit out of me. Speaking of scary, apparently the streamer mode soundtrack for this fight is so similar to the actual song that YouTube recognizes it as a copyrighted entity belonging to Nine Inch Nails. Thankfully, that's about the only threat QA1 Mail poses to me anymore. Once his tastefully understated weak spot is open, he's fighting an uphill battle he can't win. While not mechanically intensive, I have no qualms with the fight either, so it takes a respectable neutral-ish placement in the grand scheme of things. He's got my favorite animation when you beat him, which counts for something. Corsica being the newest hire to the Vandalay Corporation's upper management is unarguably the least insane. Kinda makes you wonder how she got the job. It's like if Joseph Mengels quit on Hitler and he replaced him with Mr. Rogers. That said, she definitely doesn't want you in her neighborhood at this point in the story, and negotiations quickly deteriorate thanks to Chai's abrasive buffoonery. If you've ever played Parappa the Rappa, aka one of the best games of all time, you'll probably fare alright in this duel. I ought to get Jackhep to this game sometime. He can perform a very soulful cover of Big, if you guys didn't know. The entire thing is a series of timing-based inputs and Simon Says challenges that slowly erode Corsica's stamina without necessarily beating on her as the plan goes. Unfortunately, messing up here does not cause you to repeatedly exclaim your love for various global cuisines or burger ingredients. It's not terribly taxing, but if you get sloppy, it is not out of the question that she might actually beat you to death before you can sway her against Vandalay. I never died, but I did squeak out a measly, shameful C grade at the end, a terrible humiliation regardless. While not an orthodox fight like any of the others, I happen to quite enjoy this kind of minigame, so the variety and solid execution were enough to make me a fan all the same. Kale is as evil as they come, and while I'm sure most people who were afraid that he'd get Talk no Jutsu'd at the end were set at ease after seeing him mind control his own mother, I didn't exhale until the very end. Very refreshing to see him stay a bastard all the way through. The climactic showdown with the big boss starts off in rather unorthodox fashion, a little 808 segment where I humiliated myself trying to scratch his control glove for longer than I'd care to admit. Once that's busted, the real deal kicks off. He's got a melee weapon like you, but the more important thing to watch out for are the drones. I found it really hard to focus on them and the order they light up in when you're trying to whack him and do other stuff, so it was rather challenging from the outset for me. The goal is to bust up each of his robo-limbs, each one corresponding to one of your summonable allies' abilities. I didn't realize that you had to summon them after he attacked though, so I spent a ton of time cluelessly getting beaten up before realizing how it worked. Chai is dumb as a brick, so let's just say I was getting really into the shoes of our hero for the final showdown. Once this clicks for you, Kale is actually not unbearably difficult, so it should be smooth sailing from there unless you really struggle with the little Parappa the Rapper segment at the end. Enough persistence and you blow him the fuck up, I guess. I didn't really think about it till now, but most of the bosses are like definitely dead. Chai is stone cold for that one, man. He's the real deal. While they once seemed to be an almost mythical boogeyman that only existed online, it seems furries have become far more widespread in recent years. I've seen them in cities, my own college campus, and now even in the upper echelons of corporate management. Rockfort is by design the most unassuming looking boss in his normal form, being an accountant and all. I've met a few of those guys when I was a kid going to take your child to work day with my dad, and they're more or less how you'd expect anyone who enjoys math to be. Logical types, calm, collected, and as best I could tell not in possession of robot wolf technology. Rockfort being being as threatening as he is was definitely a surprise that the game set up pretty cleverly with the tongue-in-cheek wolf in sheep's clothing comment, which was a great lead into what I consider unquestionably the best fight in the game. For one, it's got a ton of phase changes, which is really awesome. Each one is kicked off with a cool cutscene and a very intense rendition of Beethoven's Fifth, I think. I'm a game reviewer, not a composer, not really in my wheelhouse here. Variety is always welcome in a boss fight, and the distance they went to make this memorable is commendable. The first part is pretty easy. He isn't attacking you constantly, so you have a lot of windows to get your licks in without interruption. I don't know why he's got wind powers, maybe a reference to the big bad wolf blowing houses down? Unlike that wolf, who ended up getting boiled alive in a cauldron if memory serves, Rockfort has no trouble blowing straight through solid steel and shredding your health to tatters. When he's down to low health in this phase, he runs around in a panic while you harass him until he gets pissed and shucks you through another wall in quite stylish fashion, might I add. The second room sees him getting more rapid fire moves and the addition of a laser trap once you clobber him down to size again, which took me an embarrassingly long time to figure out, as seems to be a trend in this video. I thought it was one of those things where you have to kill the drones by parrying, only to realize after a while that absolutely nothing was stopping me from jogging right up to Rockfort and beating his ass after dodging a couple cycles of the lasers. Finally, after another, considerably less dignified transition, you both take the brawl into the Scrooge McDuck vault. Here he gets his most confusing attack, where he swims around under the coins and dashes into you similarly to his dashing in earlier phases. For whatever reason, neither parrying, dodging, or jumping seemed to reliably protect me here, so I just prayed he wouldn't use this move and nuked him with specials. I did notice he stunned himself once in the process of exiting this attack when I very intentionally lured him to this giant random fist, which was pretty satisfying. All in all, Rockfort is both the most memorable and the most fun boss in my eyes, earning him a spot at the top. Thanks so much for watching, and I hope you enjoyed. Once again, I gotta offer thanks to the folks kind enough to send me a key. I had a great time with the game and am still replaying levels looking for health upgrades and stuff. Apologies for taking as long as I did. Had a terribly busy week of life between the Sekiro video and school stuff. Stay tuned for more uploads every Wednesday and check out our Patreon if you didn't already. That's all for now. Deuces.